What do you guys like? Do you like nature? Do you like Harry Potter movies? Do you like a sport, squash, football, rugby? Do you like pizza? I like buses. In fact, my friends make fun of me because of that. This is what they did to my desk after the last Christmas break. The comedians, huh? Yes, those are pictures of buses with red hearts on them. That's a picture of me with a red heart and a bus underneath it. And post-its that read, "I love buses." Now, when prepping this talk, one of my colleagues, one of the fellow speakers asked me, "Well, do you actually love buses?" And I told him, maybe, but I'm not in love with buses. And there is a difference in that, trust me. Now, I haven't always had this love for buses. It's something I've developed over the past few years. And to tell you how I got into buses, I'm going to start with a brief anecdote. 2 weeks ago, I was at this big international conference about the future of bus services. It was held right here in Aberdeen. It gathered some of the major bus operators from around the world and Europe, and some of the industry leaders. Now, they were all sharing experiences of how to implement new technology, cleaner fuels, and build efficient buses or low-emission buses. Now, it became clear to me as the conference went on that we've made a lot of progress in the technology of the buses. There's a learning process going on, and as we build more buses, we are learning how to do it from the engineering side of it. But when the discussion turned on actual ways to implement more buses, what are the next steps for it, there was a bit of a controversy. Now, on the one hand, bus operators demanded that governments implemented policies to incentivize the use of low-emission buses. And the government people that were there, they said it was the fault of the bus operators who wouldn't commit themselves to new technologies. So it became a back and forth. Now, these two are not mutually exclusive, but in this discussion, it seemed like a blaming game. And in this blaming game, there was no mention of the bus users themselves, what they want, what they need, what they demand out of the bus service, which I found quite interesting. So in one of the panel sessions, which had 3 of the UK largest bus operators, I stood up, I introduced myself, Luis, University of Aberdeen, and I asked them this simple question: do you think people actually value if they're using a low-emission bus? Now, there was a brief silence. I could tell they thought, an academic with these questions. So it was a bit of an awkward 5 seconds, but then one of them said, "No, I don't think so." And then there was a brief discussion between the 3 of them and the moderator, which was open to the panel, but in the end, they all seemed to agree, "No, I don't think so," which I found quite interesting because 3 years ago, I asked myself the exact same question. Do people actually value low-emission transportation? And if so, could these be used as ways to implement new transport? And just like them, I was clueless, I didn't know. So I decided to do research on it. So I set myself to try to find out if people actually value buses. Now, transportation is a really broad subject. There's air transportation, there's sea transportation, there's road transportation, there's cycles. I wanted to focus on public transport because not much had been done at the time when I wanted to get published. So I decided to focus on buses since it's the most common form of bus. And my love for buses began. But what makes buses so interesting? Well, for starters, they're everywhere. We've all used a bus at some point. We use them to commute, we use them to go shopping, we use them after a night out. If we've ever been on a night bus, it's quite an experience. Some of you may have used it to come here. But the reality is they're essential for our communities, and they have been for quite a while. This is a picture of a 1905 bus from London's Route 11, perhaps one of the oldest routes in the world. It runs from Hammersmith to Liverpool Street. Fast forward 50 years, this is a 1950s bus serving the same route, Route 11, from Hammersmith to Liverpool Street. Fast forward 70 years, this is the new Route Master, serving Route 11 from Hammersmith to Liverpool Street. Now, it's clear that buses have gone a technological evolution, an evolution in style, certainly. They're much nicer to the eye. They have Wi-Fi now, they have screens, they're more comfortable, the rides are probably less bumpy, one would expect so. But one thing hasn't changed in the past 100 years. They are still powered by diesel. Now, diesel is very convenient. We've been using it for over 150 years to power our vehicles. There are global supply chains ready to keep our buses running. There's the expertise. We have mechanics. We have engineers. But the reality is, diesel cost has its shortcomings. We've been perfecting this transport-based system based on diesel fuel. But in the process of it, we've been choking ourselves, and we've been choking the planet. The combustion of diesel fuel produces emissions. Now, there are two types of emissions. There are the greenhouse gas emissions, which are very famous, which cause climate change and have global consequences. And then there's a second group of emissions that's not much talk about. There's not much talk about them. And those are the emissions that degrade the local environment, the local air quality that surrounds us. It's the emission, the smog we see in the pictures, the one we breathe in when we're standing next to a diesel engine. Now, two of these emissions are nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter, both of which are produced at really high concentrations when diesel fuel is oxidized or is combusted in an engine. And one example where diesel combustion has had an effect on the local air quality can be found quite near from here. Now, this is Union Street. And this is the result of me standing outside a famous burger place I really like, which name I won't say now. From the laughter, they know where it is. If you've ever been to Union Street and you haven't noticed, there's buses running up and down all day, every day. In fact, there are over 30 routes that use Union Street every single day. Now, Union Street is perhaps one of the most famous streets in Scotland. It runs from west to east. It has lots of pedestrians, it has lots of shops, lots of restaurants, lots of pubs. But lesser known is the fact Union Street is one of the places with the worst air quality in Scotland. In fact, Union Street has been consistently ranked in the top 5 most polluted streets nationwide. And this is widespread across the UK. This is a map of the concentration of that nitrogen dioxide I mentioned before. Wherever you see red, wherever you see orange, green, that means it's bad. We can see a lot of red hotspots where the cities in the UK are. We can see red where Birmingham is, where Liverpool is, Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh. Now, all of the cities I've just mentioned, they are in breach of the minimum safe level of nitrogen dioxide. And nowhere is this more clear than in one particular place, Oxford Street in London. This is perhaps one of the most famous shopping streets in the world. It's a tourist landmark. Thousands of people visit it every day. And yet Mr. Khan is not wrong. Oxford Street is the most polluted street in the world. Now, when I first found out about this, I was a bit of a shock. Oxford Street, it's in the middle of a shopping area. There are no factories, there's no industry near it. But this is Oxford Street. Oxford Street is closed, it's restricted to only buses or taxis. Now, the only diesel vehicles allowed on Oxford Street are buses. There's a lot of pedestrians in Oxford Street who are breathing in all of this. Now, this shows there is a correlation in the amount of high bus transit in an area and the air quality of said area. And taking into account that most streets that have high bus transit also have high pedestrian foot area or foot traffic, it makes it an even bigger problem. Because those nitrogen dioxides, those particulate matter that I mentioned before, are the ones that are killing us. They have health risks. They come with health risks, and they have even studies that show that they cause premature death. So something has to be done with these buses, right? But the reality of it is, less than 1% of UK buses have low emission technology. The existing schemes are just bus fleets of 1 or 2 buses implemented by a local government here and there, but there are all isolated efforts. It's not part of a nationwide strategy, or it's certainly not a priority of local governments. One of the reasons for this low uptake, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the major hurdles when you have a new technology, in this case, green technology in buses. There's uncertainty in the technology itself. Will it work? We have to develop the supply chains, we have to develop the expertise. There's uncertainty in how people will perceive this. Are people actually value the benefits that this brings to our community? And on top of that, there's uncertainty of who's going to pay for all of this. Green technology is expensive. Who's going to bear the bill of this? Now, this is where my research steps in, to try to address that uncertainty, try to find ways and try to understand what is it people value. And for this, we turn to a local project, the Aberdeen Hydrogen Bus Project. Aberdeen is home to Europe's largest hydrogen bus fleet. 2 years ago, as part of a 3-year program, 10 hydrogen buses were introduced as part of a learning program to understand if hydrogen could actually be used to power buses. In my case, I used it as a case study to try to understand what is it people value in their bus service. Because Aberdeen sets a really nice example. Because we have people that use the hydrogen buses, and we have people who use diesel buses. And we can test for differences between the two of them. For this, we used an economic tool called a discrete choice experiment, which is just a fancy name for an economic thing that values what people care. Maybe people care about the frequency of their service. Maybe people just care about the punctuality of the service. In our case, we introduce emissions. And for this, to run this discrete choice experiment, we have to go to the streets and we have to ask people. So we set out there. This is economics being done, in case you were wondering how it looked. Now I want to pause here. I want to give a shout out to our interview team here. I come from Costa Rica. It is a rather warm place. So let me tell you one thing. There's nothing like being out there on a winter morning or a winter afternoon in Scotland with an iPad, hoping for a bus user to show up. So I want to give a shout out to our interview team. So we were out there for 8 weeks in November and December, and we gathered interview data. Tried to ask people what they felt whilst they were waiting for their bus. For this, we used a survey instrument held on an iPad, which contained this discrete choice experiment, which was designed by myself and colleagues from the Health Economics Research Unit. And it had input from other departments within the university and input from the city council. After we were there, we gathered all the data and we plug it into the model using econometrics. I'm not going to go into the details of this. I don't want to bore you after you have had a glass of wine, after you had a cupcake with the details of how economics is done. But I will tell you this, running simulation methods, we can construct the model that tells us what is it people value in a bus service. And now here comes the really exciting part, I hope. First off, people who use diesel buses. They prefer services that are cheaper, they prefer services that are more frequent, they prefer services that are more comfortable, and they prefer services that are more punctual. Now, I'm not telling anything new here. You all knew that before going through all the hassle of doing interviews and surveys and running this thing. But it gives us confidence that our model is correct. And on top of that, people who use diesel buses, they seem to value a reduction in the emissions that cause the local air quality degradation. Those nitrogen dioxides I talked about before, those particulate matter. Now, if we compare this with the people who use hydrogen, these are people who regularly use the hydrogen bus services right now. They also prefer services that are cheaper, more punctual, more frequent, more comfortable, that they also value even more the reduction in the emissions that cause the local air degradation, and they value the emissions that cause greenhouse gases, or that cause climate change. Now, this shows a difference between the two of them. Furthermore, on top of that, when we ran the model and tried to predict what kind of service people would choose, the hydrogen people, they are more likely to choose a service that resembles the ones they're using now. Whereas the diesel people, they're more likely to choose a service that does not resemble the one they're using now. Now, this is interesting because both of them report the same level of satisfaction. But it somehow shows that the diesel people feel that they're missing out on something, that there's something out there for them. Perhaps, along with this evolution in the green technology, by experiencing the good, or the green buses or the hydrogen buses, there can also be an evolution in the green mindset of people, in the disposition towards a greener future. Now, as an anecdote, and to further emphasize this, when the hydrogen buses were first introduced in Aberdeen, there was a major opposition for them. They were too expensive. £1 million per bus. How many schools could we build with that? On top of that, when the buses started running on Aberdeen streets, they kept breaking down, and there were no spare parts. The mechanics didn't know what to do with the engines. They were all electronic. So to get a spare part, you had to ship it from Germany or Sweden. So reinforcing that idea, on the newspapers, you'd see the pictures of the hydrogen bus and the tow truck. They don't work, so much money. 2 years after this, 85% of the respondents from her survey thought that the hydrogen buses was a good idea. So with this, we can go to city councils. We can go to bus operators and tell them, look, if you introduce these services, people are actually going to appreciate, they're going to value them. You usually introduce even more. And by introducing even more, we can expose more people can experience them. creating some sort of a snowball effect, a green snowball effect, if you will, because we're talking about green stuff. And this way we can turn this into this. We can develop, we can put forward a green fleet out there. Now I guess I want to leave you with two messages today. The messages I learned from the Hydrogen Bus Project. One, buses are actually really cool. You should get into it. You should go to Union Street and spot buses and take pictures. We can share them if you want. I'll be here all night. And two, to address that uncertainty that was at the beginning, that uncertainty I mentioned before. Yes, it is important to know what people value. But to understand what people value, we have to make sure they experience what they're valuing. This is the case of the Hydrogen Bus Project. Or to put it in a nutshell, as one Aberdeen bus user told me when I asked him, what did he think of the bus user, of the hydrogen buses, now that he has experience using them? And he said, how can I say it in Scottish? The hydrobus, nine good, nine bad. Fine, he said. There was a slide containing that. I'm not sure of the translation. I certainly botched the how you pronounce it, but my guess is he liked them. So there you go. Thank you.